Okay, shalom everybody, thank you for coming, and tonight's shir is dedicated Refuah Shelema for Natah ben Zeisel, and for Baruch ben Freida, and for all of those whose health has been affected by the war, and especially for the safe and quick return of our brothers and sisters held in captivity, and the success for the IDF and the people of Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael, and the lasting unity of our people. Aliyat Neshamot of Yitzchak Hirsh ben Eliezer and Yitzchak Chaim ben Meir Mordechai to mark his Shloshim, and for the father of Sarah Riegler, Yisrael ben Yosef Yehuda, whose yahrzeit is the 10th of Adar. An anonymous dedication of the safe return of the army and hostages to their homes in total health and the tzachon of the Jewish nation, and promptly return home with Briut Shelema, and for the coming of Mashiach now.
Amen.
Again, I just read that the United States is actually submitting a resolution to the Security Council of the UN to compel Israel to engage in a ceasefire. It's just very, very, as someone said, the U.S. ought to be vetoing pro-Hamas resolutions and not initiating them. So it just shows you, again, as Chazal say, in the days before Mashiach, we will come to realize that there is no one that we can rely upon in the world other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in many, many ways, having that awareness is a positive rather than a negative thing. It focuses us on where we need to put our efforts. Final point is YIBONEH has recently put down a down payment towards the purchase of a SEFER Torah. We are looking for partners to help us complete payment for this Torah scroll, to commemorate the memory of a loved one, or to participate in sharing the love for Torah. Donations can be made either on the website or by link on the YouTube description box. I just want to point out that one of the exciting things that Rabbi Poston wants to do is to create a Monday and Thursday, these are Torah reading days, beginner's minyan, which would use this Sefer Torah, and it would incorporate explaining the service and going at a pace that people who are less familiar with davening would be able to do. Baruch Hashem, on Shabbos there already are existing opportunities, so Rabbi Poston and YIBONEH is gravitating towards a very significant unmet need. There is literally no weekday type of experience for people to learn, and this Sefer Torah would be used as part of that beginner service. So very, very worthy cause. And let me point out that the 613th mitzvah of the Torah is every Jew is supposed to write a Sefer Torah, and most of us are not able to write, but we at least make a sofer, a shaliach, to write. And I'm not giving you a final psak because it's a matter of controversy, but many people say that by participating in the communal writing of a Sefer Torah, and you have a chelik in that Sefer Torah, you are makayim the mitzvah d'oraisa of kesivas Sefer Torah. So it's a worthy cause just for the mitzvah itself, besides all of the Torah and Shuvah benefits that will accrue. Okay, so Be'ezus Hashem, we hope that all of those in need of Refuah should be healthy, and all of the Neshamot in need of Aliyah should be nitzaleh. This Parsha is Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is largely part 2 of Truma. Remember, we discussed last week that Parshas Truma is devoted to the details of the construction of the Mishkan. Tetzaveh is largely devoted to the Big Day Kahuna, to the various ways that the Cohens, both the Cohen Gadol and the regular Cohen, the begadim that they wear. It's very important to understand the importance of these begadim. Again, without getting into the general idea of royalty and the like, the halacha is the Big Day Kahuna are an essential component of the avoda. If the Cohen, any Cohen, were to do the avodas Beis HaMikdash without wearing all of these Big Day Kahuna, the avoda is totally invalid. It is puzzle. Any korban brought without proper Big Day Kahuna is not a valid korban. So this is not just a nice thing. This is actually ma'akev in the avoda itself. Not only that, this is called mechusar begadim. A Cohen is missing begadim. Let's say a Cohen adds a beged. Let's assume he puts on a nice necktie, or it's a cold day, and he puts a sweater over his big day kahuna. Because remember, the korbanos are brought in an open air courtyard. Right? In the building of the Mishkan, that's the menorah and the ketores and the kodesh hakdashim. But the korbanos are brought outside. Okay, I'm not sure if the desert's going to have a lot of rain or whatever it is, but certainly in Yerushalayim, Beit HaMikdash, things could be cold. Now, a Kohen does have to do the avodah barefoot, wearing big dekuna. So if he put on socks, or put on a tie, or put on a sweater, that's called meruba begadim, and the avodah is puzzle as well. So the notion, as the saying goes, clothes make the man, may or may not apply all the time, but it certainly applies legabe the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. So it's really part 2, and as we discussed last week, there's a whole machlokes. When is Moshe hearing this? Is Moshe getting this in the first 40 days? Or is this all post-Chet HaEgel? Remember, Rashi's interesting opinion was the Torah is not chronological here, and all of this is in response to the Chet HaEgel. Ramban says, no, we just follow the order of the verses. But there is another peculiarity in this Parsha, which is very, very fascinating. This is the only Parsha since the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu where Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. Moshe's name is not in this Parsha at all. In fact, it begins, Hashem says to Moshe, V'atot tetzaveh, you. There's not Moshe, you. And there's no Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lamer. That was in Truma, and this is a continuity. And the Meforshim give various reasons why Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. The most famous reason is that this is God granting Moshe Rabbeinu's request, where Moshe Rabbeinu said to God, if you're not going to forgive the Jewish people, erase me from your book. Now, L'maisa, Hashem did forgive the Jewish people, but Chazal say, when a great tzaddik imposes a curse, even on himself, it's going to happen one way or the other. Since Moshe said, erase me from the book, so Moshe had to be erased from the book. Now, I just want to point out, if you go with that cheshbon, that fits Rashi much better than Ramban, because Moshe Rabbeinu's statement, erase me from your book, is after the Chet HaEgel. So if Tetzaveh is before the Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't pronounce the curse yet. Like Rashi, it actually fits very well, because these words are being said after the sin of the golden calf. Moshe had already said, Mecheni na misifrecha. But there's another hezber from the Vilna Gaon as to why Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned, and that is, in a non-leap year, it actually doesn't work this year, but in a non-leap year, the week of Tetzaveh, meaning the week before the Shabbos of Tetzaveh, always is the date of Zayin Adar. Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, was the anniversary both of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth and Moshe Rabbeinu's death. Zayin Adar is the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, as a remez, the Torah is merames that he will die during that week by having his name absent from the Parsha. His absence from the Parsha is a remez that Moshe Rabbeinu's Petira will be the week of Zayin Adar. It actually does not work out in a leap year where Zayin Adar was last week, but it does work out in a non-leap year. So in this connection, this week is coming up, Purim Katan. Right, this year is a leap year, and we of course observe the laws of Purim in Adar Sheni, which is the real Adar. But nevertheless, there is a little bit of a remnant of Simcha, even in Adar Aleph. Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. The rule that when the month of Adar comes, we increase our joy does apply to Adar Aleph as well. And the 14th of Adar and the 15th of Adar Aleph is called Purim Katan. Small Purim. We don't say Tachanan, etc. Although we don't read Megillah, we don't do these other mitzvahs. So if you recall, let me just say a little thought from Megillah Esther that connects to a leap year. That when Haman was given permission by Achashverosh to eradicate an entire nation, And it wasn't a very long meeting. I mean, it sounds like it was you read the Megillah, it seems to have been like a 5-minute meeting. And Achashverosh said, sure, do what you want. Even Haman wanted to pay for it. Achashverosh said, you can do it for free. So Haman drew lotteries to determine what's the best month to get Am Yisrael. And Chazal say, when he came up with the month of Adar, he was very happy. He says, Adar is a bad month for the Jewish people, because that is the month that their Savior died. That is the month that Moshe died. Baruch, well, he didn't say Baruch Hashem, but he said, it's auspicious. It's an auspicious time to persecute Am Yisrael. But Chazal say, Haman made a mistake. On one hand, Moshe Rabbeinu died after 120 years. On the other hand, it was also the month that he was born. He brought the Geula. So Haman made that mistake. So Rav Yonasan Eibshitz, the great Rav of Prague, who wrote many Svarim, but he has a very famous sefer of drashos that are called Ya'aros Devash. It's actually one of the classic books of drush, complicated drashos, long and complicated. As an interesting observation, he says, well, listen, how dumb would Haman be? If Haman is smart enough to know that Moshe Rabbeinu died, then why wouldn't he be aware that Moshe Rabbeinu was born? Why would he know one thing and not know the other thing? So Rav Yonasan Eibshitz wants to be mechadesh, a big chiddush. He wants to say, Haman is much smarter than we might give him credit for. Rishoyim often are. And that is, the year that Haman drew his lottery was a leap year. Or at least the year because he's doing it for the next year. And therefore, the gezerah on the Jewish people was for Adar Sheni, which is why we keep Purim on Adar Sheni. Now, the year that Moshe Rabbeinu was born was also a leap year, but Moshe was born in Adar Rishon, not Adar Sheni. So therefore, Haman's cheshbon actually makes a lot of sense. Adar Sheni is a bad month for the Jewish people, because that is the month that Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Adar Rishon happens to be a good year because a good month because that is when Moshe was born, but that's not the month. My gezerah is for Adar Sheni, and as a result, his cheshbon was Adar Sheni is bad, Adar Rishon is good, but I got Adar Sheni, so Adar Sheni is bad for the Jews. That's how Rav Yonasan Eibshitz explains Haman's cheshbon. Haman's mistake was that all of the others are kind of combined and they become zamanim of simcha. So there's a lot of kashas on Rav Yonasan Eibshitz because first of all, I can understand that by the time Moshe Rabbeinu died, in the Midbar there would be a concept of leap years. Like, why do we have a leap year? Because Pesach has to fall in the spring, and since a lunar calendar is 11 days shorter than a solar calendar. A lunar year is 354, a solar year is 365, and as a result, any given Jewish holiday will be 11 days earlier in the year, every year. So at some point, Pesach will be in the winter, just like Ramadan floats, and the Torah is makbid that Pesach be in the spring. So 7 out of 19 years, we got to push Pesach later in the year to keep it in the spring. Now that law was already in effect by Moshe Rabbeinu's death, but to say that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in a leap year presupposes that you had Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni even before the Torah was given. That I think would be problematical, but that's his chiddush. So it turns out, therefore, Moshe was born in the leap year in Adar Aleph, and Moshe Rabbeinu died in a leap year Adar Sheni. So with this, Rav Yonasan Eibshitz wants to answer a very difficult kasha that Tosfos asks. We have a tradition that 3 great righteous tzaddikim died Shabbos afternoon. Yosef died Shabbos afternoon, Moshe died Shabbos afternoon, and David HaMelech died Shabbos afternoon. That is why Shabbos Mincha, after Shmona Esrei, we have 3 verses that talk about accepting God's judgments. Tzidkas Tzedek. that I accept God's judgment as righteous, what a mourner normally would say, and that's because we lost Yosef, we lost Moshe, we lost David, right? And this is a Messiah, that they were nifter Shabbos afternoon. So Tosafos asks the Kasha, we have another teaching, that the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, he wrote 13 SEFER Torahs. Amazing. And one SEFER Torah was placed in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Ark, and each Shevet got a SEFER Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. This became the official, like the Bureau of Standards, you have the official inch, the official meter, whatever it is. This is the official text, that all SEFER Torah had to be checked against that text. But Tosafos asked the obvious question, if Moshe Rabbeinu died Shabbos afternoon, how could he have written a SEFER Torah? 13 SEFER Torah on Shabbos. That's a kasha. So Tosafos gives a very interesting answer. Tosafos says, if Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 SEFER Torah, it must have been through a miraculous supernatural process. It couldn't be b'derech hateva. So Tosafos says, lahalacha, that you're allowed to do malacha on Shabbos if it's a supernatural, miraculous way of doing it. The Torah only asers normal human activity. It does not aser supernatural, miraculous activity. So I tell people, if you want to send your son to Hogwarts, the Harry Potter school of magic, but you're concerned they don't have Shabbos off, not a problem. You can do magic on Shabbos. Now, of course, you have another problem. You may have an Isser D'Oraisa of Kishuf. That's a separate issue. That itself is a capital offense. But you don't have to worry about Shabbos. Shabbos will not be a problem because that which you do through a miracle is not considered to be Chilul Shabbos. But Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz wants to give another answer. He actually wants to suggest that if we say that Moshe Rabbeinu died Adar Sheni, it could be that he wrote the SEFER Torah a month earlier, Adar Rishon. So when it says, a little bit of a daichik in the Lashon, that he wrote on the day of his death, it means he wrote on the calendar day that he would die a month later. Which means he actually wrote the SEFER Torah 7th of Adar, Adar Rishon. And if you work backwards from 7th of Adar, Adar Sheni, which is Shabbos, the day he actually died, to the 7th of Adar, Adar Rishon, that would not be a Shabbos day, and that way he could do it. In fact, the Neshamot says, it's kind of scary. He says, the day that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the SEFER Torah, he retired from leadership. He was like among the living dead. It's kind of a little eerie, meaning for a whole month, he was physically in this world. He was no longer the leader of Am Yisrael. In other words, he retired, 7th of Adar Rishon. He did not physically pass until the 7th of Adar Sheni. Yehoshua was a leader for that last month. Quite amazing. But that's Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz in terms of trying to reconcile all of these things. Okay. But now let me go into the actual Parsha itself. So the Parsha describes in great detail the big day kahuna. And there are 4 garments that a regular Cohen wears. And a Cohen Gadol has 8 special garments that he wears. And one of the garments of the Cohen Gadol is the Choshen. The Choshen is the breastplate. It's not really, see, the word plate is a little misleading because you think of it as metal. It's not really metal. It's made of threads. There's gold threads and techelas, the wool, the blue wool, and the argaman and the purple, and tolah shani, but really it was woven from threads, creating a kind of we call it a breastplate on his chest. And there were settings in the Choshen, precious jewels, and on each of the jewels was engraved a tribe of Yisrael. Reuven on one stone, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, all the 12 tribes. And in addition, the names Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Shiftei Yeshurun, the tribes that are upright. So you see, you have Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Shiftei, Yeshurun, the tribes of uprightness. Now, exactly how they were engraved is a very, very big machlokas. Some understand that on the first stone, which is Reuven's stone, they had the words Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Reuven. And on the last stone, which is Binyamin's stone, it said Binyamin, Shiftei, Yeshurun. So the extra words, first stone has Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, second stone has Shiftei, or the last stone has Shiftei, Yeshurun. That's one understanding. Another understanding is a little complicated, and it basically went with the idea that you have to have 6 letters on each stone, because if you add all the letters of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the 12 tribes, and Shiftei, Yeshurun, you get 72 letters. There are 12 stones, so each stone has 6 letters. So the way it works is this. Reuven is 5 letters. So Reuven, and you just have an Aleph, which is the first letter of Avram. Then you have Shimon, which is 5 letters. So you have the Beis of Avram. Then you have Levi, which is 3 letters. So that gives you 3 letters, Resh, He, Mem. So, which completes the 6 letters. So that way you have Avram on the first 3 stones, Yisachar, etc. Meaning to say, the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were not written in a single stone, but rather they were mashlim. They completed the number of 6 that you needed for each stone. But whether it's one way or the other, you have to have the names of the tribes, and you have to have Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shiftei, Yeshurun. Now, this is called the Choshen, and the jewels, sapphire, ruby, diamonds, we always have doubts regarding the precise identification, are called the Avnei HaChoshen, the jewels of the Choshen. Now the Torah then says, V'nasata el HaChoshen, this is a directive to Moshe, who communicated it to Bezalel, you shall place in the Choshen Ha'urim v'Hatumim, something that is called the Urim v'Tummim. So, before we even know what this is, let me point out that the common mistake people make is they call the Choshen Urim v'Tummim. They call the breastplate and the jewels Urim v'Tummim. It's very clear that Urim v'Tummim is not the Choshen and the jewels, because the Torah says you shall put inside of the Choshen the Urim v'Tummim. So, what is Urim v'Tummim? So, literally, Urim comes from the word or, light. Tumim comes from tamimut, perfection. And this was, you might call it a software package, so to speak. It was a parchment that had certain mystical names of Hashem that we don't know. And when you insert it, right, the Cohen is wearing the Choshen. Now the Choshen is folded over from the bottom, right? So there's a front part that has the jewels, and then there's a back. The Urim v'Tummim, this cloth, this parchment, was inserted in the folds of the Choshen. And once it is inserted, it imparted to the Choshen the power to communicate prophetic messages from God. Meaning, you could almost look at it as the Choshen is the hardware, and the Urim v'Tummim is the divine software that made it a prophetic medium. So how did that work? That would mean that when the Cohen Gadol is wearing the Urim v'Tummim, a question would be submitted to him. Shall we go to war? And lights, the letters that would spell the answer, would light up. Now, there is a machlokas. When the letters lit up, was this visible to everybody? Meaning, would I see, right? Would I see the lights? Or was this only a prophetic experience the Cohen Gadol had? Meaning, many Shitas say that no one else saw this. But the Cohen Gadol would see this, and would communicate the message. Of course, it's a little difficult to see, actually, even if it lights up, because remember, the Kohen Gadol has to look down. I mean, if you think about this, it's not like the Urim and Thummim is there. If I'm the Kohen Gadol, it's here. So I look down, how am I going to see? So that's one difficulty. Another difficulty is that because you're dealing with a limited number of letters, every letter of the Aleph base is there, to be sure, but you can't ask essay questions. Urim and Thummim have to be kain or lo. They have to be very, very specific questions that are answered on a yes or no basis. And in Nach itself, we have examples where people made serious mistakes because they were not specific enough in their question. So if they would ask, for example, shall we go to war? And the answer was kain. And they went to war and they were defeated. The problem was they didn't ask Hashem, will we win the war? Hashem sometimes wanted them to go to war and be defeated. So you got to be sure that your follow-up questions are right. Now, Chazal say that the Urim and Thummim couldn't be used for routine private questions. You couldn't go to the Kohen Gadol and say, I lost my car keys, where are they, or whatever it is. Rather, it mentions that these were matters that involved Am Yisrael as a whole. Shall we go to war? Shall we, make a ceasefire with Hamas, whatever it is. That would be the type of question that would be submitted to the Urim and Thummim. And when we had prophecy in general, the Urim and Thummim was one of the prophetic media that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. The Gemara says in Maseches Sotah, and here too people misunderstand this. The Gemara says in Maseches Sotah that we didn't have the Urim and Thummim during the Second Temple period. We only had the Urim and Thummim during the First Temple period. Now, once again, people misunderstand, and they think the Kohen Gadol didn't have the breastplate and the choshen during the Bayis Sheni. That's absolutely not true. First of all, why wouldn't he have it? Even if you're going to tell me the original one got lost, make another one. That's always the rule. I mean, we can make a new Aron. I mean, whatever we need to make, we make. We make a new Mizbeach, we make a new menorah. If for some reason the original Big Dekuna were lost, we make a new one. There's no logical reason why a given garment of the Cohen would not be available in the Bayit Sheni. And not only that, halachically it would have to be available because there are certain avodos that the Kohen Gadol does, and he has to wear the right uniform. So be sure you understand this. So when we say they didn't have Urim and Thummim in the Bayit Sheni, it doesn't mean they didn't have the Choshen and the Avnei Choshen. It means they didn't have the prophetic medium that conveyed messages from God via the Urim and Thummim. And there's a machlokas. Does it mean we lost the software package? Or does it mean that the software package no longer worked? I mean, that's another machlokas, meaning, did we have the actual cloth, but it just didn't work? Or we didn't have the cloth? But that makes perfect sense because all of that is consistent with the idea that we lost prophecy in the Bayit Sheni. Remember, the very last prophets are Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, and they are at the very beginning of the Bayit Sheni, meaning for the most of the 420 years of the Second Temple, which is all post-biblical, there were no Nevi'im. So it's perfectly logical, it's a very symmetrical idea. Once we don't have Nevuah, we don't have this special thing of Urim and Thummim, which is a form of Nevuah. Again, I forgive me for repeating, I just know that many people, in fact, when I was younger, was laboring under the same misconception. Many people think that the Choshen did not exist in the Bayit Sheni. Absolutely not. The Choshen and the Avnei Choshen are not the same as Urim and Thummim. By the way, if anybody here is a graduate of a well-known university in New Haven, Connecticut, Yale University, you may remember that the motto of Yale University are two Hebrew words in Hebrew letters called Urim and Thummim. A little pretentious, But they basically say, we're the source of knowledge. Urim, we bring light to the world in a perfect way. Urim and Thummim, and that is the motto of Yale University. Harvard's motto is Latin, and it's veritas, which is truth. And that's obviously a lie. It's an old joke. They say, the old newspaper of the Communist Party in Russia, Soviet Union, was Pravda. Now, Pravda means truth. So I once heard a really good thought. Why did the Communist Party name their newspaper Truth? Because they wanted every word to be a lie, even the title. So they picked a title that was also a lie. So that's that. So every single thing in the paper is not MS. Okay. So this is the idea of the Urim and Thummim. Now, it's interesting. There's a fascinating point that the Vilna Gaon makes. If you remember the story of Shmuel, so the story of Shmuel begins, it's the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, begins with the story of a woman, Chana, who was married to Elkanah, and Elkanah had two wives, Chana and Penina. Penina had children. Chana had no children, and Chana was very heartbroken. And she went, this is before the Beis HaMikdash, but the Mishkan was located in Shiloh for over 300 years. So she went to Shiloh, and she entered the Mishkan, or the courtyard of the Mishkan, and she was praying silently. In fact, all of the laws of Shemona Esrei are derived from the way Chana prayed. It says her lips were moving, her voice could not be heard, etc. And the pasuk says, "V'yachshavah Eli l'shikora." Eli, he was both the judge and the Kohen Gadol. Eli was the Kohen Gadol. Thought she was drunk. She was drunk, and he told her, "Get out of here! What are you coming into the Mishkan when you're in a state of intoxication?" And she said, "You're wrong. I am a woman of bitter spirit, and I am pouring out my anguish to HaKadosh Baruch Hu." And then Eli gave her a bracha, etc. And of course, she was zocha to have a son, Shmuel. So the Gra says the following. When Eli sees Chana praying in a way that apparently was unfamiliar, the idea that you pray silently is learned from Chana. She must have been the first one, because otherwise Eli would not have seen this as strange. But Eli saw this as very bizarre behavior. So it says he consulted the Urim and Thummim. What is she? And the letters were spelled based on the tribes. Shikora, Shin, Chaf, Resh, Hey. So he thought she was drunk because the letters that were lit up were Shin, Chaf, Resh, Hey, Shikora. But the problem is, you see, that the Kohen Gadol needs Ruach HaKodesh to decipher the order of the letters, because since the letters are fixed in the tribes, the message might sometimes be jumbled. You have to rearrange the letters. And that takes a second level of Ruach HaKodesh. There's level number one to see the letters that are lit up. And level number two is to properly decipher the letters. So here's the thing. Eli saw the letter Shin Chaf Resh Hey, and he interpreted it as Shikora, when in fact you should rearrange the letters, and it would either be Keshera. Keshera means a proper woman, or maybe Kesara, a woman like Sarah Imenu. And that's when she says, Lo Adoni, you are not my master. And the Gemara says that means you did not have proper Ruach HaKodesh to be able to decipher the message. Very, very amazing. So Urim and Thummim is a difficult prophetic medium to use, because in addition to the difficulty of looking down, there is the difficulty of deciphering the order, because the letters may come out in a different order than the message, and the Kohen Gadol needs a level of Ruach HaKodesh. But be it as it may, in the Bayit Sheni, when we no longer had Nevuah, we didn't have the Urim and Thummim. And in fact, in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which are the books that were written after the Jews returned to Eretz Yisrael after the 70 years of the Babylonian exile, and they dedicated the Second Temple. So there are all sorts of genealogical lists, a lot of names in the Ezra and Nehemiah, which, unfamiliar names. And it mentions a whole group of Kohanim who could not prove their lineage as Kohanim. So it says there, they will not be permitted to eat of the sacrifices until the Cohen arises with the Urim and Thummim to clarify their status. In other words, they didn't have the Urim and Thummim at that particular junction. Therefore, without prophecy, they will not be able to be admitted to kahuna. See, today, where being a Cohen just means duchening and getting an aliyah, we take your word for it. You come in and you say you're a Cohen, we don't ask questions. But if you wanted to work in the Beis HaMikdash, you'd have to have a lot more proof. You couldn't just come in and say, I'm a Cohen. You had to have records and credentials, and this family did not have those credentials, and therefore the pasuk says beferish, they are excluded from the priesthood until the Cohen Gadol arises with the Urim and Thummim. So in this connection, I want to share with you a very interesting thought of the Chassam Sofer. And this is a famous story. The Gemara in Maseches Kedushin, at the end of the first perek, discusses the mitzvah of kibbud aviyim, honoring a parent. And when it looks for examples of kibbud aviyim, it looks to non-Jews. Esav, of course, is held up as an example, but it then uses a more contemporary example for Chazal, and it talks about a goy who lived in Ashkelon, and his name was Dama ben Nesina, an Oved Kochavim who lived in Ashkelon. And it says one time, this is during the Second Temple, by the way, this is the proof they had the Avnei HaChoshen. It says the stone of Binyamin popped out of the Choshen. That's called Yoshva. Some say Yoshva is a diamond, but whatever it would be, the Yoshva stone popped out of the Choshen, and it got lost. So they had to replace this precious stone. And apparently it was very rare, but the only person they could find that had it was Dama ben Nesina, and he kept this jewel, the Yoshva jewel, in a jewelry box that was locked with a key, and the key was under his father's head, and his father was taking a nap, and Dama ben Nesina refused to wake up his father, and as a result, he lost the sale. Apparently they looked around for somebody else, and he was willing to give up whatever amount of money it would have been, $1 million, whatever it would have been, he was willing to give it up because of kibbud aviyim. And Chazal say, you see how devoted a son he is. The Gemara goes on and says that as a reward for his honoring his parents, the next year he had a para aduma born in his flock, a totally red, this is really a brownish red, it's not fire engine red, but a totally red para, which is necessary for purification. It's very, very rare, because the color is not rare. The color is not rare at all, but you can only have up to one non-red hair. If there are two non-red hairs, no good. So that's very rare, that a hair wouldn't be white or a hair wouldn't be black. And he was zocha to para aduma, and they offered him a lot of money for that. They offered him even more money than for the jewel. And he said, just pay me what you would have given me for the jewel, and that would have been enough. This is the famous story of Dama ben Nesina. An interesting sideline of that story is that even though the Gemara uses him as an example of kibbud aviyim, what he did halachically may have been incorrect. I mean, let's apply this halacha l'maisa. Your father is sleeping. Somebody offers you $10 million for something. He said, I'm not waking up my father for anything. Your dad gets up and you tell him, Abba, you should know how much I honor you. I gave up a $10 million deal so you could sleep. Now, is your father going to be happy with that? Or is your father going to say, what an idiot? This is the dumb son that I raised? Says, I mean, again, the halacha is very simple. If you know for sure your parent would want to be woken up, you wake him up, because kibbud aviyim is to do what your parent wants. I mean, you see, so it's a funny thing that Dama ben Nesina actually acted in a way that would be contrary to halacha. So the Gemara is not bringing him in because that's the way I should behave. but it's bringing him in because of his attitude. Meaning to say, all right, he was ignorant, and anyway, kibbud av v'yam doesn't necessarily apply to non-Jews anyway, according to halacha. He did the wrong thing. And I'm not supposed to do that. But Chazal are using him as an example of an attitude. He was willing to give up a tremendous economic gain because of kibbud av v'yam. We should understand, we should have that type of attitude, even though halachically we actually wouldn't do what he did. So this is the famous story. Now, keeping that story on the side, I just want to mention a kasha the Chassam Sofer has on the Rambam and how he uses the story to answer it. Note very carefully that the Gemara doesn't just say a stone of the Choshen was lost. It makes a very specific point. It was the stone of Binyamin that was lost, which is Yoshva. Yoshva is the last stone. Avda Yoshva mi Binyamin. Now, is that an important detail? No, maybe not. I'm not going to say this is the strongest question in the world. I mean, Chazal sometimes just give me information. But still, one might wonder, why was there such a need in the story to identify that it came from a particular tribe, namely Binyamin? The last stone popped out. And then we can also ask, well, why did it pop out? Like, how does it pop out? Okay. So here at the Chassam Sofer's Ha'ara, I had mentioned in the Gemara in Yuma tells us that in addition to the 12 tribes of Yisrael, by the way, in this context, Yosef, it's not Ephraim and Manasseh, because again, you understand the counting. When we talk about dividing Eretz Yisrael, Shevet Levi did not get a distinct portion, so our 12 tribes are not counting Levi. When you don't count Levi, you count Yosef as Ephraim and Manasseh. But when you count Levi, and you're keeping 12 tribes, you count it as Shevet Yosef. So on the Avnei HaChoshen, there was not Ephraim and Manasseh. It was Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, Binyamin. Okay, not Ephraim and Manasseh, but okay. But I had mentioned, in addition to the 12 tribes, we had 3 words, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and 2 words at the end, Shiftei, Yeshurun. When the Rambam brings his description of the Avnei HaChoshen, the Rambam changes the text. Instead of Shiftei Yeshurun, he says Shiftei Ka, Yud Hey. Why does he deviate from the Gemara? The Gemara says Shiftei Yeshurun. The Rambam says Shiftei Ka. Well, again, there are a number of possibilities. Sometimes the Rambam actually had a different girsa in the Gemara, a different text. But here's what the Chassam Sofer suggests. Yeshurun is one of the names of Yaakov, besides Yisrael, Yeshurun, and the Jewish people as a whole, the upright ones. But Yeshurun is a specific name that is used for the Jewish people when they are bi'achdus, when they are in unity and love. Where do we know that Yeshurun is the name of achdus and love? From Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell bracha in Zeisel bracha. This is also a popular chasana song. Vayehi b'Yeshurun melech. In Yeshurun, in this upright nation, there will be a king, God. B'hisasef rashayam, when all of the leaders come together, yachad, in unity, shiftei Yisrael. Meaning, God is the king of Yeshurun. When there's achdus and unity, b'hisasef, right? You hear this at chasnas. B'hisasef rashayam, yachad shiftei Yisrael. So says the Chassam Sofer, Yeshurun is the glorification of God through unity and love of all of Am Yisrael. And Shiftei Yeshurun is, of course, the goal that all of Am Yisrael should aspire to, but it's specifically engraved on the stone of Binyamin because of all of the brothers. Binyamin was the only brother that did not have the taint of rivalry and sinah. Obviously, the brothers who participated in the sale of Yosef obviously had that chisaron. And Yosef himself, although Yosef was a victim, but Yosef brought stories about his brother to his father, whether it was justified or not, even if we assume it was justified, but still, Yosef was an instrument of polarization and machlokas. The only one who was totally immunized from that fray, the only one that represents unconditional love and connection, with no machlokas, was Binyamin. And that's why, although the appellation of Shiftei Yeshurun is not only going on Binyamin, it's a description of the ideal state of all of Am Yisrael, but it's inscribed next to Binyamin because he was the epitome of Shiftei Yeshurun. Now we know, during the Second Temple period, there was a lot of sinat chinam among Am Yisrael, right? What do Chazal say? The first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of avodah zarah, gili arayas, sexual immorality, shvichas damim, murder. The second Beis HaMikdash, the Jewish population was largely observant. They kept the mitzvahs, but there was sinas chinam, so many different movements. Now we don't know exactly. I can't tell you the year that the Dama ben Nesina story took place. We don't know, but it was during the Bayit Sheni. So the Chassam Sefer wants to suggest that the reason why it was the stone of Binyamin that popped out, that had the appellation Shiftei Yeshurun, is a message from God. You no longer deserve Yeshurun. You're no longer living with Achdus. You're no longer living with love. You're not emulating the model of Binyamin, and you're not emulating the concept of Yeshurun. The stone pops out. It disappears. So the Chassam Sefer wants to say, so when it was replaced in the Dama, well, not from Dama and Nesina, because he had Kibbut Aviyim, but from whoever they got it from, we don't know. They did not engrave it Shiftei Yeshurun anymore, because they understood that God was telling them they are not worthy of that title. So they switched it to Shiftei Kah. So the Chassam Sefer says ingeniously, when the Gemara in Yuma says it was engraved Shiftei Yeshurun, that's before the story of the stone popping out. And when the Rambam says they did Shiftei Kah, that is their understanding of how they had to change it after the stone popped out. It's very ingenious. Now, it still doesn't answer the question, well, how on earth does the Rambam know that? I mean, the Rambam does have to have some source for Shiftei Kah. He can't just make up the narrative. And that's a little bit of a tzorichian. There must be a different girsa somewhere, or a different makor. We don't always know. To this day, one of the interesting studies of Rambam is to try to trace the source of the Rambam. Now, most of this work has already been done. If you look at the Kesef Mishnah, for example, the Magid Mishnah. So what they do all the time is, when the Rambam says a halacha, they will tell you where is the Gemara, where is the Yerushalmi, whatever the source is. But to this day, there are a number of halachos in the Rambam for which we don't know what the source is. Rav Chaim Kanievsky actually wrote a SEFER trying to give sources for some of these, and he addressed most of them. He managed to find most of them, but even he did not find 100%. And one thing that's very clear is the Rambam may have had access to midrashim and other things that we've lost. It would be very disheartening to kind of go over the amount of Torah material we have lost, but many things we have lost. I mean, the Rambam writes, there was a whole Talmud Yerushalmi on the order of Kachim, Korbanos, and we don't have it at all. In fact, that's a famous story. Around 150 years ago, there was a Hungarian rabbi who claimed to be Sephardic, okay, whatever it is, and he claimed to have discovered a lost Yerushalmi on Chulin and Bechoros. Imagine, a rediscovered Gemara. And he wrote commentaries on it. And he had haskamot from great rabbis. But it turned out, he forged it. He forged a Gemara. Now, can you imagine what type of genius it would take to forge a Gemara, particularly Yerushalmi, which we're not even so used to, and do it in such a way that great rabbis were fooled by it. He really was a genius. But eventually the forgery got discovered. People are debating, how did the forgery get discovered? So some say he had to tell somebody. So, once you tell a person, that's the end of it, because how can you pull off such a wonderful feat, not a wonderful feat, but such a great feat, and not tell anybody? So once the cat's out of the bag, you're in trouble. That's the end of it. Others say that the Rogatchover Gaon discredited it by the following observation. The Rogatchover, this is a digression, but the Rogatchover Gaon said that in every single tractate of the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, there is always one rabbi who's only mentioned there and nowhere else. Meaning, most of the Tanam and Amor are mentioned in many tractates. Rav Yochanan is mentioned every tractate. Reish Lakish, Abaya, Rava. But in every Maseches, there's one person who's not mentioned anywhere else. And the Rogatchover could identify them. In his Yerushalmi, he said, there's not a single person who's not mentioned somewhere else. Therefore, this could not be an authentic work of the Talmud. Now, is that strong enough a raya to discredit? I don't know, but be it as it may, it's discredited. So, Elamai, if this was a forgery, the Yerushalmi Unkachim we don't have. So we've lost a lot of things. And it could very well be that the source of the Rambam of the Shiftei Ka versus the Shiftei Yeshurin may be lost, but the Chassam Sofer's observation that we no longer deserve the Yeshurun is a very powerful, interesting observation because of Sinat Chinam. Josephus, who was a Jew who went over to the other side, but he was an eyewitness to Titus and the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And, people debate whether we regard him as totally reliable or not. By and large, he is reliable, except for his tendency to paint the Romans in as positive a way as he can, for very good reason. He was living in Titus's Roman house. I mean, he really, even with the best of intentions, he could not demean the Romans. I mean, he was under their control. But anything other than that, he's generally considered to be fairly reliable. And when he describes Sinat Chinam, it doesn't just mean, I don't like you. He talks about warring Jewish factions who were fighting in the Beis HaMikdash itself, in which one side was shooting arrows and the other side was shooting arrows back, and the Kohanim had to crawl under the arrows to be able to bring the korbanos in the last weeks before the Romans destroyed it. The Beis HaMikdash itself became a battling ground because there were many, many factions. There were factions who wanted to surrender to the Romans. There were factions who wanted to wage war. There were factions who were fighting within themselves who should be dominant. So the Sinat Chinam is not just, people didn't get along. There actually was milchama and bloodshed of Jews against Jews. On the other side of the coin, the Netziv, in a very, very famous introduction to his commentary on Chumash, describes the Sinas Chinam in a different way than Josephus. Josephus looked at it as military activity of Jew against Jew. He said it was religious superiority. There were so many different movements, and each movement looked at the other movement and said, you're an apikoros, you're not authentic Judaism. And the Netziv says, we have to understand there are many pathways in Torah, and when you simply denigrate people that have different derachim, that is the Sinat Chinam of religious superiority and triumphalism. Let me just add, the Netziv was severely criticized for that, which kind of confirms his point. He was saying, how dare you call us intolerant? It reminds me of when Pope Benedict, the retired Pope, made a statement that too many Muslims are involved in violence. He was met with a protest that was burning down some buildings. So it's an interesting point. I mean, you're protesting the fact that I called you violent by engaging in violence. That kind of proves the statement. So in a way, the opposition to the Netziv was confirmed the Netziv's point that people didn't have a respect for the different views of others. We know that in Eretz Yisrael, this has been a perennial problem, forever, in which each side, whatever it is, looks at the other. Apikoris, Kofer, parasite, Amalek. The list of negative appellations goes on forever. And it moves in all directions, really all directions. Religious to secular, secular to religious, Hasidim to Misnagdim, Misnagdim to Hasidim, different groups of Hasidim, different groups of Misnagdim, Ashkenazim, Sfardim, in both directions. And the number of ways that you could slice and dice Am Yisrael, which is not a large nation to begin with, is kind of almost approaching infinity. You can divide people in so many different ways. And again, as I say this all the time, and I'll say it again, I know I'm repeating myself, that one of the blessings that we have in the darkness of the conflict that we face is that to a large degree it's brought us together in ways that did not exist for many, many years until now. Unfortunately, even that seems to be disintegrating a little bit. Okay, but Meir Hashem, hopefully, will keep the unity and the achdus and the avas Yisrael and the care that we have for each other, because as Thomas Paine said about the American Revolution, we must hang together, for otherwise we shall surely hang separately. And that is indeed the story and the fate of Am Yisrael. Vayhi Bishurun Melech, Moshe said, that God is the king of Yeshurun, protecting us and taking care of us. But when are we Yeshurun? Bisasef Rashayam, when all the leaders come together, Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, and all the tribes of Israel come together with Achdus. So may we be zocha to that, and may we be zocha to be metaken the Senat Chinam, and in that way bring the Geula and bring the Binyan Beis HaMikdash and the Shalom for Am Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael, B'mheira v'yameinu. Amen.